My rusted pickup truck's headlights cut through the early morning fog as I spotted something unusual in the flooded access road. A luxury SUV sinking slowly into the mud, its tires spinning helplessly. I almost drove past. God knows I had my own problems that morning. The bank had just delivered their final notice, and Willow Creek Farm, land that had been in my family for 5 generations, had exactly 6 months before foreclosure. But something made me stop. That split-second decision to help a stranded stranger would unearth a botanical treasure hidden on my property for over a century, one that powerful corporate interests would do anything to control. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The worst drought in Nebraska history had hit Pinewood Valley like a sledgehammer. 3 months without meaningful rain had turned streams into dusty riverbeds and fields into cracked wastelands. That morning in June 2023, I was heading out at dawn to check on our irrigation system, an outdated network of pipes and pumps that was our last defense against total crop failure. My daughter Olivia had calculated we had maybe 10 days of water left in our reserve pond. Just 25 and fresh out of agricultural college, she'd come home when her mother passed last year, determined to help save our struggling farm. Her modern techniques had improved our yields, but no amount of knowledge could make rain fall from empty skies. "Dad, we need to consider selling the East Field," she'd said the night before. Her voice steady, despite the pain such a suggestion caused us both. It might generate enough capital to upgrade the irrigation system for the remaining land. I'd nodded silently, the weight of 5 generations of Parkers bearing down on my shoulders. My ancestors had weathered the Dust Bowl, economic depressions, and personal tragedies without surrendering a single acre. Now it seemed I would be the one to break that chain. These thoughts were circling my mind when I spotted the SUV on the flooded access road that cut through the western edge of our property. Spring rains had created a mud pit there before the drought hit, and the summer heat had baked it into a deceptive crust, solid looking on top, but pure quicksand underneath. The vehicle was a Range Rover, worth more than I'd make in 3 years. A woman in business attire stood beside it, designer shoes caked with mud, attempting to make a call on her phone. Her frustrated expression told me she had no signal, not unusual for this remote stretch of road. I pulled my truck to a stop and rolled down the window. "Need some help?" Relief washed over her face. "Oh, thank goodness. I've been stuck for almost an hour." She gestured to her mud-covered clothes. "I've tried everything. My GPS routed me this way as a shortcut to Mason Creek. I'm already late for a meeting." "That GPS doesn't know about our spring mud pits," I said, reaching for the tow chain behind my seat. "I'm Mike Parker." "Catherine Wilson," she replied, then added, "Kate, I'm with the Global Seed Conservation Initiative. We're having a regional conference in Mason Creek." "A seed scientist stuck in the mud on a farm," I chuckled despite my troubles. "Seems fitting. Somehow, it took 20 minutes of careful winching to free her vehicle without damaging it. By then, her business suit was a lost cause, splattered with Nebraska's finest topsoil. As she thanked me, I noticed her studying our fields visible in the distance. "Those are Highland red corn varieties, aren't they? Drought-resistant strain?" she asked. I nodded, surprised by her specific knowledge. "Trying to be, anyway. This drought's testing the limits of resistant." "That's actually related to why I'm here," she said, brushing mud from her hands. "Our organization tracks and preserves heirloom and endangered seed varieties. This region historically had some unique strains developed specifically for drought conditions. Under normal circumstances, I might have been intrigued, but with foreclosure looming, academic discussions about heritage seeds seemed irrelevant. I gave her directions to get back to the highway without hitting another mud pit. "I appreciate the rescue," she said, handing me her business card. Dr. Catherine Wilson, botanical geneticist. If there's ever anything I can do to return the favor. I tucked the card in my pocket, expecting never to use it, just doing what neighbors do, even if you're not exactly a neighbor. As she drove away, I continued to our irrigation pond, where the real crisis awaited. The water level had dropped another 8 inches overnight. The cracked earth around its perimeter looked like a cryptic message warning of what was to come. Olivia was already there, testing the water quality. Her face told me everything before she spoke. Mineral concentration is too high. If it drops any further, we'll risk salt damage to the crops. How long? Maybe a week before it's unusable. Dad, we need to consider... I know, I interrupted, not wanting to hear the word selling again. Let me check something first. My grandfather had always maintained that a secondary spring existed somewhere on our property. A deep underground water source he'd once tried to tap without success. He'd spent years searching for it based on old family records, becoming something of a local legend for his determined but fruitless quests with divining rods and crude drilling equipment. The old maps in the barn might show where Grandpa was. Searching, I suggested, grasping at increasingly thin straws. The barn had stood since 1910, its weathered timbers housing 5 generations of farm equipment, family artifacts, and the accumulated debris of over a century of continuous occupation. The back room had been my grandfather's workshop and de facto archive, where he'd stored family documents and his extensive research about the property. Most of the maps were faded and stained, many marked with my grandfather's notes about potential water sources, all of which had been investigated and found wanting over the years. As I unrolled yet another brittle document, I noticed something odd. A survey map from 1888, showing a structure that no longer existed. "What's this?" Olivia asked, pointing to a notation near the property's northeast corner. Original greenhouse location. WH collection, maintained 1880-1892. No idea, I admitted. There's nothing up there now except that rocky hillside and some scrub oak. WH, Olivia mused. William Harrison? The name rang a distant bell. Wasn't he mentioned in those old family journals? Some botanist who stayed here during the late 1800s? Olivia nodded, excitement growing in her voice. William Harrison was one of the most important botanical collectors of the 19th century. He traveled throughout the Midwest, documenting native plants before agricultural development changed the landscape. But most of his collection was thought lost in a fire. Her agricultural education was proving its worth in unexpected ways. And he stayed here, on this farm. According to local historical records, yes, your great-great-grandfather, Eugene Parker, provided him a place to propagate and study specimens. They built a greenhouse somewhere on the property. She studied the map more carefully, right where this hillside is now. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The northeastern corner of our property had always been considered unusable, a rocky hillside too steep and barren for crops. Family law held that a landslide in the early 1900s had altered the topography, but I'd never connected this to the possibility of buried structures. Worth checking out? I suggested, willing to pursue even unlikely leads in our desperate situation. The hillside looked unremarkable as we approached it that afternoon. Drought-resistant weeds and scraggly oak trees clung to the rocky soil. Nothing to suggest it had ever been anything but the natural feature it appeared to be. According to the map, the greenhouse should be right about here, Olivia said, comparing the old survey to her phone's GPS coordinates. I scanned the area skeptically. If there was anything here, it's long gone now. Maybe not entirely, Olivia replied, moving toward an unusual formation of rocks. These aren't natural. They're too regularly placed. She was right. What I'd always assumed to be random stone outcroppings showed signs of deliberate arrangement, the remains of a foundation, now almost completely covered by a century of soil accumulation and erosion. The landslide must have buried it, I realized, memories of my grandfather's stories suddenly clicking into place. That's why he could never find the spring. It was under the greenhouse, and the greenhouse was under the hillside. Using the shovels from my truck, we began to excavate what appeared to be a corner of the foundation. After an hour of digging, we uncovered a section of mortared stone and the rusted remains of an iron framework, unmistakably part of a Victorian-era greenhouse. "Dad, look at this!" Olivia called, brushing dirt from something embedded in the wall. A small brass plaque emerged. William Harrison Botanical Repository, Est 1880. So the legend was true. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Ooh," I murmured, running my fingers over the tarnished metal. Harrison really did have a facility here. As we continued excavating, the extent of the buried structure became clear. The greenhouse had been substantial, at least 40 feet long, and completely engulfed by the landslide. But the most intriguing discovery came as we uncovered what appeared to be a cellar door, its wooden surface rotted but its iron frame intact. A storage cellar for the greenhouse, I wondered aloud, working to clear the accumulated soil from around its edges. "Makes sense," Olivia nodded. "They would have needed temperature-controlled storage for seeds and specimens." With considerable effort, we managed to pull the deteriorated door open, revealing a set of stone steps descending into darkness. The stale air that rushed out carried the earthy scent of undisturbed soil and, remarkably, the faint aroma of dried plants. Using our phone flashlights, we carefully made our way down the steps. The cellar had been largely protected from the elements by the landslide that had buried it. Its stone walls remained intact, and while the wooden shelves had partially collapsed, dozens of metal containers, 19th century specimen boxes, still lined the walls. "This is incredible," Olivia whispered, her voice reverential as she carefully opened one of the boxes. Inside, perfectly preserved in charcoal and dried silica, were seed specimens, each in a labeled glass vial. "Dad, do you understand what we're looking at?" This could be Harrison's lost collection, one of the most important botanical archives of Native American plants ever assembled. I understood enough to recognize we had stumbled upon something significant, but my mind immediately turned to more practical concerns. Could any of these still be viable, seeds that might be drought-resistant? Olivia carefully examined the labels. Some of these species are now endangered or thought extinct in the wild. Harrison specialized in plants that could survive extreme conditions. She held up a vial labeled Zea mays subspecies aridus with an 1885 date. This is an ultra-drought-resistant corn variety that was documented but thought lost to cultivation, if even a small percentage of these seeds are viable. The implications dawned on me slowly. We had uncovered not just a historical curiosity, but potentially a treasure trove of genetic material specifically adapted to survive in precisely the conditions now threatening our farm. Seeds developed before modern agriculture, selected naturally for resilience rather than yield, might hold the key to surviving the increasing droughts affecting our region. "We need expert help," I said, remembering the mud-covered botanist. From that morning, I pulled out the business card, Dr. Catherine Wilson, Global Seed Conservation Initiative. "The woman whose car you pulled out?" Olivia asked. "Talk about perfect timing." "Almost too perfect," I mused, a strange uneasiness settling over me. What were the odds that a botanical expert would just happen to be stranded near our property? The same day we discovered a hidden botanical collection? That evening, after documenting our find with photographs and careful notes, I called the number on Kate's card. Her surprise seemed genuine when I described what we'd found. A complete Harrison collection? Still intact? The excitement in her voice was palpable even through the phone. That's extraordinary. His work on drought-resistant native crops was decades ahead of his time. "How quickly can you come see it?" I asked. "I can be there tomorrow morning," she replied, without hesitation. This could be the most significant botanical discovery in decades. After hanging up, I shared my lingering concerns with Olivia. "Doesn't it seem odd? A seed conservation expert gets stuck right near our property, and hours later we find a hidden seed vault." Olivia considered this. "The Global Seed Conservation Initiative is legitimate. I studied their work in college, but you're right, it's a remarkable coincidence. Let me do some digging." Her online research confirmed that Dr. Catherine Wilson was indeed a respected botanical geneticist with the organization she claimed to represent. However, something else caught Olivia's attention. "Dad, look at this," she said, turning her laptop to show me a news article. Bennett Agritech just announced plans to acquire 5,000 acres in Pinewood Valley for a new research facility. They specialize in patenting genetic modifications to create drought-resistant crops. Bennett Agritech was one of the largest agricultural corporations in the country, known for aggressive acquisition of both land and genetic patents. Their CEO, Richard Bennett, had a reputation for ruthless business tactics and controversial legal battles over seed patents. "You think they're connected to our discovery somehow?" I asked. "I don't know," Olivia admitted, "but they've been buying drought-affected farms throughout the region at bargain prices, and they've specifically mentioned interest in our watershed area in their press releases." The coincidences were mounting, but we had no concrete evidence of anything suspicious. For now, the priority was understanding what we had found and its potential value, both historical and practical. Dr. Wilson arrived early the next morning, dressed appropriately this time in field clothes and boots. Her reaction to the cellar was everything we might have hoped for: genuine awe and professional excitement. "This is even more significant than you described," she said, carefully examining the specimen boxes. Harrison's collection wasn't just random samples. He was systematically documenting drought-adaptive traits in native species. This cellar contains a genetic library specifically focused on arid environment survival. "Could these seeds still be viable?" I asked. The farmer in me still focused on practical applications. "Some almost certainly are," she confirmed. "Many seeds can remain viable for decades or even centuries under the right conditions. This cool, dry environment, combined with Harrison's preservation techniques, would have been nearly ideal." "What would something like this be worth?" Olivia asked directly. Kate looked up from her examination. "Historically, priceless, practically," she considered carefully. "The genetic material alone could be worth millions to the right agricultural research institution. These natural drought-resistant traits are exactly what modern breeding programs are trying to replicate through genetic modification." The figure hung in the air between us. Millions, more than enough to save our farm and modernize our operations. But something in Kate's expression suggested complications. "There are ethical considerations," she continued. "This collection represents botanical heritage that arguably belongs to the world, not just to whoever owns the land where it was found. The proper approach would be collaborative preservation and research, with appropriate benefits flowing back to you as the landowners." Her ethical framing reassured me somewhat. "The Global Seed Conservation Initiative would help with that process?" "Absolutely," she nodded. "We specialize in precisely this kind of discovery and preservation work. We can help document everything properly, test viability, and create a plan for both conservation and potential commercial applications." As Kate continued her preliminary assessment, Olivia pulled me aside. "Dad, I just got a text from Sam Morgan at the university. He says Bennett Agritech representatives have been asking questions around town about our property specifically. Professor Samuel Morgan had been my daughter's mentor at Agricultural College and remained a trusted advisor. If he was concerned, we needed to pay attention." "Did he say what kind of questions?" I asked. "Historical records, soil surveys, and specifically any mentions of William Harrison's time here," Olivia replied, her expression troubled. "They've been at it for weeks, long before the drought got this bad." The puzzle pieces were shifting into place, but the picture they formed was still unclear. How could Bennett Agritech know about a greenhouse buried for over a century? And what did Kate's appearance on our road have to do with their interest? When Kate emerged from the cellar with preliminary notes and photographs, I decided on direct questioning. "Dr. Wilson, are you familiar with Bennett Agritech's activities in this region?" Her expression flickered momentarily before settling into professional neutrality. "They're one of several commercial entities interested in drought-resistant genetics." "Why do you ask?" "Because they've been asking about Harrison's work on our property, and then you show up, a bit too conveniently, the same day we discover his collection." Kate sighed, setting down her notebook. "I suspected you might make that connection. The truth is, I'm here because of rumors about Harrison's lost collection. The Global Seed Conservation Initiative has been tracking references to it for years. We accelerated our research when we learned Bennett Agritech was also pursuing it. So getting stuck on our road wasn't an accident," Olivia asked sharply. "That was genuine misfortune," Kate insisted. "But yes, I was in the area specifically to research Harrison's time here. When you pulled me out of the mud and I realized whose farm it was, it seemed like fate." "Why not just be upfront about it?" I demanded. "Would you have shown a complete stranger your property based on a historical rumor?" She countered. "Most landowners are understandably protective. I was planning to approach you formally through proper channels, but then you called me." Her explanation was plausible, but trust had been damaged. "And Bennett Agritech, what's their interest?" "They've recently acquired Harrison's journals from a private collector," Kate explained. "The journals apparently reference a complete seed catalog hidden at a location corresponding to your property. They'll want exclusive rights to any genetics discovered here, patents they can leverage globally." The implications were clear and concerning. Bennett Agritech would seek to control and commercialize the genetic legacy we'd discovered, potentially restricting access to drought-resistant traits that could help countless farmers facing climate challenges. "We need more information before making any decisions," I said firmly, "and independent verification of what we're dealing with." Kate nodded, accepting this cautious approach. "I understand your hesitation. I suggest consulting Professor Morgan. His reputation for integrity is well established." She paused. "But I should warn you, Bennett Agritech won't approach this ethically. Once they confirm the collection is here, they'll use every legal and financial lever to obtain it." As if summoned by our conversation, the rumble of vehicles approaching drew our attention. 3 black SUVs with the Bennett Agritech logo emblazoned. On their doors rolled up our driveway, kicking up dust from the drought-parched earth. The man who emerged from the lead vehicle was immediately recognizable from news reports and magazine covers. Richard Bennett himself, CEO of the agricultural giant, dressed in an immaculate suit that seemed absurdly out of place on our struggling farm. "Mr. Parker," he called out with practiced cordiality, "I hope you'll forgive the unannounced visit. I'm Richard Bennett." "I know who you are," I replied, moving to intercept him before he could approach the hillside where our discovery lay exposed. "What brings the CEO of Bennett Agritech to our humble farm?" His smile remained fixed, but his eyes flicked past me to where Kate stood, recognition and something like anger flashing across his features. "I see Dr. Wilson has beaten us to the punch. Interesting, given that your organization supposedly focuses on public domain genetics rather than commercial applications, which is precisely why we should be involved," Kate responded evenly. "Harrison's collection belongs in the scientific commons, not locked behind corporate patents." Bennett's attention returned to me. "Mr. Parker, I'll be direct. We have reason to believe a historically significant botanical collection exists on your property. Bennett Agritech is prepared to make a generous offer for excavation and research rights." "How generous?" I asked, more to gauge his knowledge than out of genuine interest. $2 million, he stated without hesitation. "Immediate payment, no contingencies. Enough to modernize your entire operation and weather this drought with ease." The figure was staggering, far more than our struggling farm was worth on the open market. It was also specific enough to suggest Bennett knew exactly what lay beneath our hillside. "And if we're not interested in selling those rights?" Olivia asked, joining the conversation. Bennett's expression hardened slightly. "The legal ownership of botanical specimens discovered on private property is complex, especially when they have historical significance. Prolonged court battles benefit no one, particularly farmers facing imminent foreclosure." The threat was thinly veiled. Bennett would tie us up in expensive legal proceedings if we didn't cooperate, knowing our financial situation couldn't withstand such pressure. "We'll need time to consider your offer," I replied carefully. "Of course," Bennett nodded. "Business cards for my legal team." He handed me an embossed card. "I'll expect your call within 48 hours. After that, the offer decreases by $50,000 each day." With a final calculated smile, he added, "Drought conditions wait for no one, Mr. Parker." As Bennett and his entourage departed, the three of us stood in stunned silence, watching dust clouds rise behind their vehicles. "How did they know?" Olivia finally asked. "We only discovered the greenhouse yesterday." "Harrison's journals must have been more specific than I realized," Kate said. "Or they have satellite imaging that detected the foundational outline." "Or someone told them," I added, giving Kate a pointed look. She met my gaze directly. "Not me. Bennett Agritech represents everything my organization opposes. They patent nature and then charge farmers for access to their own agricultural heritage." Despite my lingering suspicions, her indignation seemed genuine. "We need professional advice," I decided, "legal and scientific." "And security," Olivia added. "If this collection is as valuable as everyone seems to think, we can't leave it unprotected." That evening, we carefully concealed the entrance to the cellar and installed motion-detecting cameras borrowed from neighbor farms. Professor Morgan agreed to visit the next morning, bringing a colleague with expertise in agricultural law. As we sat at our kitchen table, the enormity of our situation sank in. In the span of 24 hours, our primary concern had shifted from drought and foreclosure to protecting a hidden botanical treasure that powerful interests were willing to pay millions to control. "What would Grandpa think?" Olivia mused. "He searched for underground resources his whole life, convinced something valuable was hidden on this land." "He wasn't wrong," I said softly. "Just looking for the wrong treasure." Outside, the first stars appeared over drought-stricken fields that had supported our family for generations. Tomorrow would bring difficult decisions about the future, not just of our farm, but potentially of agricultural genetics that could help farms worldwide adapt to changing climate conditions. One thing was certain: the mud-stuck stranger I'd helped on a desolate county road had indeed changed our future forever, though whether for better or worse remained to be seen. Sheriff Thomas Jenkins arrived just after dawn, his patrol car kicking up dust as it rolled up our driveway. I'd known Thomas since high school, and his expression, a mixture of professional concern and personal discomfort, told me something was wrong before he even stepped out of the vehicle. "Morning, Mike," he greeted me, removing his hat. "Got a situation we need to discuss." "What kind of situation?" I asked, though I already suspected it involved our discovery. Thomas glanced toward the hillside. "Got a complaint about potential damage to historically significant artifacts on private property. Bennett Agritech filed for an emergency injunction early this morning. Claims you're excavating important historical materials without proper permits or preservation protocols." Olivia, who had joined us on the porch, scoffed openly. "That's rich coming from a corporation that wants to lock genetic heritage behind patents." "Just delivering the official notice," Thomas said, handing me a document. "Court hearing is set for Thursday morning. Until then, you're prohibited from any further excavation or removal of materials from the site." I skimmed the legal jargon, recognizing Bennett's strategy. "They're not trying to stop preservation. They're buying time to build their case." Thomas nodded slightly. "Off the record, Bennett's people have been talking to county commissioners, the mayor, even Judge Reynolds. They're promising a major research facility, hundreds of jobs. They're trying to turn local sentiment against us," Olivia realized. "Community interests versus private landowner rights," Thomas confirmed. "It's a narrative that works in small towns hit hard by economic downturn." He replaced his hat. "For what it's worth, Mike, plenty of folks remember what your family has contributed to this community for generations. Bennett's money talks, but it doesn't erase history." As Thomas drove away, Professor Morgan's station wagon approached, followed by Kate's rental car. The cavalry, such as it was, had arrived. Sam Morgan had been teaching agricultural science for 30 years. His weathered face and practical demeanor reflected decades spent balancing academic knowledge with hands-on farming experience. With him was Jana Nilsson, an agricultural law specialist whose reputation for defending family farms against corporate interests was well known throughout the Midwest. After examining our discovery and the legal notice, they gathered with us in the kitchen. Professor Morgan spoke first. "The historical and scientific significance is undeniable," he confirmed. "Based on preliminary inspection, Harrison's collection appears to contain over 300 distinct seed varieties, many now rare or presumed extinct in the wild. The preservation methods were remarkably advanced for the time, suggesting many could retain viability." "And the legal situation?" I prompted. Jana Nilsson adjusted her glasses. "Complicated, but not hopeless. Agricultural artifacts discovered on private property generally belong to the landowner, but there are exceptions for items of extraordinary historical or scientific significance. Bennett's strategy appears to be arguing this collection constitutes a national scientific resource that requires professional institutional management, which conveniently would be provided by them," Kate interjected. "Precisely," Jana nodded. "However, their approach has weaknesses. First, you discovered the collection on your own property while conducting normal agricultural operations. Second, you immediately sought professional consultation for proper preservation. Third, you haven't attempted to sell or commercialize the materials." "So what's our best course of action?" Olivia asked. "A strategic partnership," Jana suggested. "Not with Bennett Agritech, but with a coalition of public institutions that can match their resources while ensuring the collection remains accessible to the scientific community and independent farmers." Professor Morgan nodded in agreement. "The university would certainly participate. With proper backing from agricultural preservation trusts and possibly federal research grants, we could establish a research facility right here on your property, one that studies these genetics while keeping ownership and control in the proper hands." That approach would also strengthen your legal position, Jana added. Courts are more likely to favor private landowners who demonstrate commitment to responsible stewardship over corporate acquisition, regardless of financial resources. Their proposal aligned with my instincts, preserving both our connection to the land and ensuring the discovery benefited more than just corporate interests. But practical concerns remained. What about our immediate situation? I asked. The farm is still facing foreclosure in 6 months, and we have a drought to contend with. That's where smart leveraging comes in, Jana replied. The discovery significantly increases your property's value and research potential. We can use that as negotiating leverage with your bank while pursuing emergency agricultural grants based on the historic significance of the operation. It was a path forward, complicated and uncertain, but offering hope where 24 hours earlier there had been none. As our discussion continued, Olivia's phone chimed with an alert from our security cameras. "Someone's at the hillside," she reported, turning the screen to show us. 3 figures in Bennett Agritech windbreakers were examining the entrance to the cellar, taking photographs and soil samples. "That's trespassing," I said, already moving toward the door. "And violation of the very court order they filed," Jana added with grim satisfaction. "Document everything, but don't confront them physically. This gives us significant leverage." By the time we reached the hillside, Sheriff Jenkins was already there, having responded to our call. The Bennett employees were attempting to explain their presence as environmental assessment permitted by county regulations. "Environmental assessment requires landowner permission," Thomas informed them firmly, "and any examination of the historically significant site violates the temporary injunction your own company filed this morning." As the Bennett employees departed under the sheriff's supervision, Richard Bennett himself appeared, having apparently waited in a vehicle parked on the county road bordering our property. "An unfortunate misunderstanding," he offered smoothly. "Overzealous employees exceeding their instructions." "Your instructions, I presume," Professor Morgan replied, his academic demeanor hardening. Bennett's attention shifted to the assembled group, his expression calculating as he assessed the new players in the situation. "Sam Morgan, still tilting at corporate windmills, I see. And Jana Nilsson, Bennett Agritech has encountered your particular brand of obstruction before. We call it legal protection of family farms," Jana replied evenly. Bennett turned to me. "Mr. Parker, I see you're surrounding yourself with idealists rather than realists. Noble, but ultimately impractical. My offer remains open for precisely." He checked his watch. 39 more hours. After that, we move to Plan B. "Oh, which is?" I asked. "Comprehensive legal action asserting national interest in these botanical resources, combined with petitioning for emergency conservation intervention due to the demonstrably precarious financial situation of the current landowner." His smile never reached his eyes. "Courts tend to favor preservation over private financial difficulties." After Bennett departed, our impromptu coalition gathered to assess the situation. The trespassing incident had strengthened our legal position, but Bennett's resources and influence remained formidable challenges. "We need to move quickly on multiple fronts," Jana advised. "File counter-injunctions based on the trespassing, secure preliminary agreements with research institutions, and address the farm's immediate financial situation to undercut their financial instability argument. The university can provide initial documentation support and conservation expertise," Professor Morgan offered. "I'll make calls today." "And the Global Seed Conservation Initiative can offer international scientific backing," Kate added. We have partnerships with research institutions worldwide who would support keeping these genetics in the public domain. The pieces of a viable defense were coming together, but one crucial element remained unaddressed. What about the drought? I asked. Even with legal victories, we still need water for this season's crops. Professor Morgan and Kate exchanged meaningful glances. That's where Harrison's collection becomes immediately relevant, Kate explained. Among the specimens, we identified several ultra-drought-resistant corn varieties that could be fast-tracked for testing and limited propagation under emergency research protocols. You're suggesting we plant experimental seeds from the 1880s? Olivia asked skeptically. Under controlled conditions, yes, Professor Morgan confirmed. With modern germination techniques, we could have viability assessments within days and small test plantings within 2 weeks. More, those test plantings would also strengthen our legal case, Jana noted, demonstrating practical application of the discovery for agricultural sustainability during climate crisis conditions. For the first time since the drought began, I felt a genuine spark of hope, not just for saving our farm financially, but for addressing the fundamental challenge of growing crops in increasingly arid conditions. Harrison's forgotten seeds, preserved from a time before industrial agriculture, might hold keys to survival in our changing climate. Let's do it, I decided. All of it. The legal countermoves, the institutional partnerships, and the seed testing. The following weeks brought furious activity to Willow Creek Farm. A team of botanical researchers carefully catalogued the entire Harrison collection, confirming over 300 distinct seed varieties with special focus on drought-adaptive traits. Preliminary viability testing showed remarkably high germination rates for seeds over a century old, a testament to Harrison's preservation techniques. Bennett Agritech continued legal maneuvers, filing additional injunctions and attempting to sway local opinion through promises of economic development. But their position weakened significantly when national media picked up the story, framing it as a David versus Goliath battle over agricultural heritage and climate adaptation. The court hearing became almost anticlimactic. Judge Reynolds, despite her connections to local business interests courted by Bennett, ruled firmly that the collection's discovery on private property by the landowner established clear ownership rights. Bennett's arguments about national scientific resources faltered against our demonstrated commitment to scientific collaboration and public access. Most significantly, the first test plantings of Harrison's drought-resistant corn varieties showed extraordinary promise. Where modern hybrid crops withered in the continuing drought, these heritage seeds, adapted to the specific conditions of Nebraska's climate through natural selection rather than laboratory modification, thrived with minimal irrigation. By harvest time, we had small but viable crops of 5 distinct ultra-drought-resistant corn varieties growing on test plots. Agricultural researchers from 3 continents had visited to study both the growing plants and the remaining Harrison collection. The Global Seed Conservation Initiative had helped establish a permanent research facility in our renovated barn, creating both immediate income through facility leasing and long-term value through scientific partnerships. 6 months after pulling Kate's Range Rover from the mud, I stood with Olivia and our new partners overlooking fields where Harrison's rediscovered genetics were demonstrating their remarkable resilience. The farm's financial situation had stabilized through research grants, facility leasing, and premium prices for the limited harvest of heritage crops. Bennett Agritech had retreated strategically, publicly congratulating us on the contribution to agricultural science while privately continuing to seek ways to access and patent the genetics we'd discovered. Their proposed research facility had been relocated to another county where it would face less organized resistance. Your grandfather was right all along, Kate remarked as we watched researchers carefully harvesting seeds from the test plots. There was an invaluable resource hidden on this land, just not the one he was looking for. He would have loved this, I agreed. 5 generations of Parkers have worked this land, but he always believed its greatest contribution was still waiting to be discovered. As the setting sun cast long shadows across fields that had endured the worst drought in Nebraska history, I couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of hope and apprehension. The discovery of William Harrison's botanical collection had transformed our failing farm into the center of international agricultural interest almost overnight. Scientists from universities across the country were now regularly visiting Willow Creek Farm, examining seeds that had lain dormant for over a century, preserved by Harrison's ingenious methods and the stable environment of the buried cellar. "Dad, the university team needs your signature on these research agreements," Olivia said, approaching with a stack of papers. Her expression had changed over these weeks. The worry lines that had formed during our financial crisis were fading, replaced by the focused intensity of someone who had found her true purpose. With her agricultural science background, she had become an essential liaison between our family farm and the research community suddenly camped on our doorstep. I glanced through the documents, legal language outlining how the genetic material from Harrison's collection would be studied, shared, and protected from privatization. Jana Nilsson had crafted these agreements carefully, ensuring that while scientific progress would be unimpeded, no corporation could swoop in and patent these heritage seeds. "These look good," I said, signing the final page. "Any updates on Bennett's latest move?" Olivia's expression darkened slightly. Their legal team submitted a proposal to the County Historical Commission, claiming that Harrison's work was funded by a research grant from a company that eventually became part of Bennett Agritech's corporate lineage. They're trying to establish historical ownership claims. "That sounds tenuous at best," I replied, though concern nagged at me. Bennett Agritech had resources we couldn't match in a prolonged legal battle, even with our new academic allies. "Professor Morgan says it's likely just a delay tactic while they look for stronger angles," Olivia assured me. "The historical records clearly show Harrison was an independent botanist who collaborated with our ancestor Eugene Parker. There was no corporate sponsorship." As we walked back toward the farmhouse, the sound of vehicles approaching drew our attention. A convoy of 3 trucks bearing the state university's logo rolled up our driveway, followed by a sleek black car I didn't recognize. Professor Morgan emerged from the lead truck, waving enthusiastically. "Mike, Olivia, the germination results are even better than we projected. 83% viability on the drought-resistant corn varieties, absolutely unprecedented for seeds this old." The news was remarkable. Modern seed banks considered 20 to 30% viability a success for long-term storage. Even with advanced technology, Harrison's preservation techniques, combined with the stable environment of the buried cellar, had achieved something extraordinary. "That's incredible, Sam," I acknowledged. "What does it mean practically?" "It means we can establish larger test plots immediately," he explained. "With your permission, we'd like to dedicate 5 acres to growing out these heritage varieties. This season, the drought conditions actually provide ideal testing circumstances." The black car had parked behind the university trucks, and now its passenger emerged. A distinguished-looking woman in her 60s, dressed in formal business attire that seemed out of place on our dusty farm. "Mr. Parker," she approached with her hand extended, "I'm Eleanor Blackwood, Director of the National Agricultural Preservation Trust. May we speak privately?" The name of her organization immediately commanded attention. The NAPT was the country's most prestigious and well-funded agricultural heritage foundation, with connections to both government agencies and international conservation efforts. Of course, I agreed, directing her toward the farmhouse while Olivia continued discussing technical details with Professor Morgan's team. Inside, Eleanor Blackwood wasted no time on pleasantries. "Mr. Parker, I'll be direct. The discovery on your property represents what may be the most significant recovery of pre-industrial agricultural genetics in North American history. The NAPT is prepared to offer substantial support to ensure these resources remain both preserved and accessible to researchers addressing climate adaptation challenges." "What kind of support?" I asked, though I had a sense of where this conversation was heading. She placed a folder on the kitchen table. "A comprehensive package, research funding, legal protection against corporate acquisition attempts, infrastructure development for proper seed storage and propagation facilities, and direct financial support to ensure your farm's stability during this transition period." Opening the folder revealed a grant proposal outlining exactly what she'd described. Millions in direct funding, legal resources that would dwarf Bennett's team, and a clear path toward establishing Willow Creek Farm as a permanent research station. "This seems too good to be true," I said carefully. "What's the catch?" Eleanor smiled slightly. "Perceptive. Yes, there are conditions. The NAPT would require a conservation easement on the portion of your property where the greenhouse was discovered, guaranteeing its perpetual dedication to research and education. Additionally, all findings from Harrison's collection would enter the public domain rather than remaining under private control." "That's actually in line with our intentions," I noted, somewhat relieved. "We never wanted to commercialize this discovery." "Excellent," she nodded. "However, there's one more element you should be aware of. Richard Bennett serves on our board of directors." The revelation landed like a thunderclap. "Bennett? The same man trying to seize control of Harrison's collection through legal maneuvering?" "The same," Eleanor confirmed calmly. "His position on our board gives him influence, but not control. Our bylaws prevent board members from personally profiting from trust activities, which is precisely why he's been pursuing acquisition through his company rather than through NAPT channels." "So he knows about your offer?" I asked, suddenly suspicious of the entire proposal. "He was recused from the discussion due to conflict of interest, but yes, he's aware we're approaching you," she acknowledged. "In fact, I suspect he's counting on your distrust of him to lead you to reject our offer, leaving you vulnerable to continued legal pressure from Bennett Agritech." Her frankness was disarming, but Richard Bennett's involvement with the organization, offering us support, created a troubling complication. "Why would the NAPT want to work with us when one of your board members is actively trying to undermine us?" "Because the Trust's mission transcends any individual board member's interests," Eleanor replied firmly. "Bennett joined our board 3 years ago as part of his company's public relations strategy to appear environmentally conscious. His term expires in 4 months, and the board has privately decided not to renew it precisely because of situations like this." She leaned forward, her expression intensifying. "Mr. Parker, Bennett's strategy is clear. He'll continue legal harassment until your resources are depleted, then swoop in with a generous offer when you can no longer afford to fight. The NAPT's involvement changes that equation dramatically." The strategy she described aligned perfectly with what we'd seen from Bennett so far. But could I trust an organization where he held a leadership position, even if that position was supposedly limited? "I'll need to discuss this with my daughter and our advisors," I said finally. "Of course, take 24 hours, Eleanor replied, rising to leave. "But be aware that Bennett Agritech has scheduled a press conference tomorrow afternoon. Our intelligence suggests they plan to announce a historic partnership with the State Historical Preservation Office regarding significant agricultural artifacts discovered in Pinewood Valley. They're attempting to create public perception of inevitability. After she departed, I immediately called Professor Morgan, Jana Nielsen, and Kate Wilson to the farmhouse. As our impromptu advisory council gathered around the kitchen table, I shared the details of Eleanor Blackwood's proposal and Bennett's board position. The NAPT is absolutely legitimate, Professor Morgan confirmed after reviewing the documents. Their work preserving heritage agricultural practices and genetic diversity is unparalleled. Having their support would transform this from a David versus Goliath battle to something much more evenly matched. But Bennett's involvement is concerning, Jana acknowledged, her legal mind already identifying potential complications. Even with recusal protocols, he would have access to information about the Trust's strategies and resources dedicated to this project. Kate had been unusually quiet, studying the proposal with intense focus. "There's something else we should consider," she finally said. "The preliminary testing shows that several of Harrison's corn varieties demonstrate drought resistance far superior to anything currently on the commercial market, including Bennett Agritech's flagship products." You think that's why Bennett is so determined to control this discovery?" Olivia asked. "It's not just about acquiring valuable genetics," Kate explained. "It's about preventing competition. Bennett Agritech has invested billions in developing genetically modified, drought-resistant crops, heritage seeds that outperform their products in natural drought conditions could undermine their entire business model." The revelation shifted my understanding of the situation. Bennett wasn't just pursuing a valuable acquisition, he was trying to eliminate a threat to his company's market position. "That actually makes the NAPT's offer more credible," Jana noted. "If their mission is preserving agricultural heritage and genetic diversity, they'd naturally oppose Bennett's attempts to control or suppress these discoveries." "But can we trust an organization where he has influence?" I pressed. "Eleanor Blackwood has a reputation for integrity," Professor Morgan assured me, "and the Trust's governance structure prevents any single board member from controlling policy decisions. With proper legal safeguards in the agreement, the risks would be minimized. And the alternative is continuing to face Bennett Agritech alone," Olivia added pragmatically. The decision remained difficult, but the path forward was becoming clearer. The NAPT's support would provide resources we desperately needed while sharing our commitment to keeping Harrison's discoveries accessible rather than privately controlled. "Let's draft conditions for accepting their offer," I decided. "Additional legal protections, transparency requirements, and explicit exclusion of Bennett from any involvement in this specific project." Jana began outlining terms immediately, her expertise in agricultural law proving invaluable once again. By midnight, we had developed a comprehensive counter-proposal that would accept the NAPT's support while establishing clear boundaries against Bennett's influence. The next morning, as I prepared to contact Eleanor Blackwood, Sheriff Jenkins's patrol car once again appeared in our driveway. This time, his expression was grimmer than before. "Mike, we've got trouble brewing," he said without preamble. "Bennett's people have been meeting with state officials. They're claiming the Harrison collection constitutes abandoned property of historical significance that falls under state jurisdiction rather than private ownership." "That's absurd," I protested. "It was on our land, undisturbed for over a century." "I know," Thomas agreed, "but they've convinced the State Historical Preservation Office to file for an emergency hearing. Judge Reynolds has agreed to consider it tomorrow morning." The timing was strategic, creating legal uncertainty just as the NAPT was offering support. Bennett was orchestrating pressure from multiple directions simultaneously. "There's more," Thomas continued reluctantly. There's talk that the state might invoke eminent domain if the historical significance claim holds up. Bennett Agritech has apparently offered to fund a state-operated research facility for the public benefit if the collection is removed from private hands. They're trying to use the state as a proxy, Olivia realized. Get officials to seize the collection, then gain control through their generous funding offer. Thomas nodded grimly. Politics and money make uncomfortable bedfellows. Just wanted you to know what's coming. After he departed, I immediately called Eleanor Blackwood. Her response to our counter-proposal was swift and positive. These terms are entirely reasonable, Mr. Parker, she agreed. In fact, they align with protections I would have suggested. The board has authorized me to accept these conditions and proceed immediately with the partnership, including the explicit exclusion of Richard Bennett from any involvement, I pressed. Especially that provision, she confirmed. Between us, several board members have been concerned about his conflict of interest for some time. This situation merely confirms the wisdom of not renewing his term. With the agreement in place, the NAPT's resources were immediately available, beginning with their legal team, which would represent us at the emergency hearing the following day. The NAPT's lead attorney, Marcus Rodriguez, arrived that afternoon, with a team of 3 associates and a historical property rights specialist. Their preparation was thorough and reassuring, identifying precedents that strongly supported our position as legitimate owners of the discovered artifacts. The abandoned property claim is legally tenuous, Rodriguez explained as we prepared for the hearing. Courts have consistently held that objects found on private property belong to the landowner unless specific prior claims exist, which is clearly not the case here. And the eminent domain threat, I asked. More concerning but still manageable, he acknowledged. We'll argue that the public interest is already being served through your collaboration with research institutions and the NAPT. State seizure would actually impede ongoing scientific work and agricultural trials. That evening, an unexpected visitor arrived at the farm. Margaret Harrison Wellesley, a distinguished historian specializing in 19th century botanical exploration, and most significantly, the great-great-granddaughter of William Harrison himself. When the NAPT contacted me about my ancestors' rediscovered collection, I knew I had to come immediately, she explained, examining the seed specimens with evident emotion. I've spent my career studying his work, but I never imagined so much of his collection had survived. Her presence added another powerful dimension to our case. As a direct descendant of William Harrison and the foremost scholar of his work, her support for our stewardship approach carried significant weight. I have something that might help your case, she offered, opening an antique leather portfolio. Family correspondence between William Harrison and Eugene Parker specifically, addressing the ownership and future of the botanical collection. The yellowed letters, preserved within the Harrison family for generations, could not have been more timely or conclusive. In one dated 1890, just before the landslide that buried the greenhouse, Harrison explicitly granted ownership of the entire collection to the Parker family in gratitude for their years of support and collaboration. My ancestor believed botanical knowledge should remain accessible to those who worked the land, Margaret explained. He specifically rejected offers from commercial interests who sought to control his discoveries. The Parker family's commitment to preservation aligned with his vision of agricultural knowledge as a common heritage rather than private property. With this historical evidence, our position for the emergency hearing was substantially strengthened. The abandoned property claim would be difficult to maintain against explicit written transfer of ownership, and the eminent domain argument was undermined by Harrison's clearly stated intentions regarding the collection's purpose. The morning of the hearing arrived with unexpected drama. As we prepared to depart for the courthouse, a convoy of vehicles appeared, not Bennett's corporate entourage, but 3 news vans from major networks. Somehow, our local legal dispute had captured national attention. The drought crisis gives this story broader relevance, Professor Morgan explained as reporters set up cameras. Heritage seeds that could help farmers adapt to changing climate conditions. That's not just local news anymore. I had never been comfortable with public speaking, but Marcus Rodriguez advised me to make a brief statement. Public opinion can influence legal proceedings, especially when government actions are involved, he counseled. Keep it simple and focus on the agricultural benefits for drought-affected communities. Standing before the cameras, I tried to channel my grandfather's straightforward dignity when addressing matters of importance. Our family has farmed this land for 5 generations, I began. When drought threatened our livelihood, an unexpected discovery offered hope. Not just for our farm, but potentially for farmers everywhere facing similar challenges. I explained how Harrison's seeds were already demonstrating remarkable drought resistance in preliminary trials, and how our partnerships with research institutions and the NAPT would ensure these genetic resources remained accessible to all farmers, not locked behind corporate patents. This isn't about private profit, I concluded. It's about preserving agricultural heritage and using it to address the challenges we all face in a changing climate. That's what William Harrison intended when he collaborated with my great-great-grandfather, and that's the legacy we're committed to honoring. The courthouse in Mason Creek had stood since 1912, its limestone facade projecting the solidity and permanence of law in a world where everything else seemed increasingly uncertain. As we entered the imposing building, Richard Bennett was already present with his legal team, looking uncharacteristically concerned as he watched our procession, now strengthened by the NAPT's attorneys, Professor Morgan, Kate Wilson, and most significantly, Margaret Harrison Wellesley. Judge Reynolds, a stern woman in her 60s with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency, called the hearing to order precisely at 9 o'clock. The State Historical Preservation Office presented their case first, arguing that the Harrison collection constituted abandoned property of exceptional historical significance that should be placed under state protection. Their argument, clearly influenced by Bennett's legal team, emphasized the public interest in preserving such historically significant materials and questioned whether a private farm facing financial difficulties could provide adequate protection and access for research purposes. When our side presented its case, Marcus Rodriguez methodically dismantled these claims. He introduced the Harrison-Parker Correspondence, establishing clear ownership transfer, outlined the extensive preservation and research partnerships already in place, and presented evidence of the active agricultural trials demonstrating practical applications of Harrison's seed varieties. Margaret Harrison Wellesley's testimony proved particularly powerful. As both a historian and William Harrison's direct descendant, I can state unequivocally that the current arrangement at Willow Creek Farm represents precisely the kind of stewardship my ancestor envisioned. His letters consistently expressed distrust of institutional control and preference for keeping botanical knowledge connected to working agricultural communities. Throughout the proceedings, I noticed Judge Reynolds watching Richard Bennett's reactions during our presentations, her expression thoughtful. When Bennett's attorney attempted to introduce evidence about the significant public resources Bennett Agritech was prepared to contribute to a state-managed facility, the judge interrupted sharply. "Counselor, this hearing concerns ownership determination and public interest considerations, not funding proposals from private corporations. Please restrict your arguments to legally relevant matters." After 3 hours of presentations and questioning, Judge Reynolds called a brief recess before rendering her decision. During the break, Eleanor Blackwood approached me with cautious optimism. "The judge seems skeptical of the state's position," she observed, "particularly after Harrison Wellesley's testimony. Having the express wishes of the original botanist presented by his own descendant is compelling." When court resumed, Judge Reynolds delivered her ruling with directness characteristic of her reputation. "The court finds insufficient evidence to classify the botanical collection discovered on Parker property as abandoned within the legal definition." The correspondence between William Harrison and Eugene Parker establishes clear transfer of ownership, and the current Parker family has demonstrated responsible stewardship through appropriate preservation measures and research partnerships. Relief washed over me as she continued. Furthermore, the court finds that the public interest in these botanical resources is currently being served through existing collaborative arrangements with research institutions and the National Agricultural Preservation Trust. State intervention through eminent domain would be redundant and potentially disruptive to ongoing scientific work. With a final bang of her gavel, she closed the hearing. Petition denied. Court adjourned. The courtroom erupted in hushed conversations. Bennett's expression remained controlled, but the tightness around his eyes revealed his frustration. As his legal team gathered their materials, he approached me directly. "Impressive maneuvering, Mr. Parker," he acknowledged with forced cordiality. "The NAPT involvement was unexpected. Eleanor Blackwood has always been resourceful. The transmission aligned with our intentions for Harrison's collection," I replied neutrally. "Keeping these resources accessible rather than controlled by any single entity." Bennett's smile tightened. "A noble sentiment, but practical concerns remain. Developing viable commercial seed varieties from heritage genetics requires infrastructure and expertise beyond what your farm partnerships can provide. Bennett Agritech's offer remains open, now with the additional validation of Harrison's genetics showing such promise in preliminary trials." "Thank you for your continued interest," I responded, maintaining professional courtesy despite my internal satisfaction at his defeat. "We'll keep it in consideration as we move forward with our existing partnerships." As Bennett departed, Professor Morgan joined me, watching the CEO's retreating figure. "He's not giving up," he observed, "just changing strategies." "I know," I acknowledged, "but we're in a stronger position now. The legal ownership is established. The NAPT partnership gives us resources to continue development, and the public attention makes it harder for him to apply pressure tactics." Over the following weeks, Willow Creek Farm transformed rapidly. The NAPT funding allowed us to establish a proper seed preservation facility in a renovated outbuilding, complete with climate control systems and modern germination equipment. The test plots of Harrison's drought-resistant corn varieties expanded to 15 acres, showing remarkable vigor despite the continuing dry conditions. Research teams from 3 universities established regular rotations at the farm, carefully documenting the growth characteristics of the heritage varieties and comparing them with modern commercial strains. The results were increasingly compelling. In drought conditions, Harrison's carefully selected landraces consistently outperformed even the most advanced genetically modified varieties, including Bennett Agritech's flagship products. "It's not surprising when you think about it," Professor Morgan explained as we walked the test plots. Harrison was selecting these varieties based on natural resilience in this specific regional environment. Modern breeding focused on maximizing yield under ideal conditions, often sacrificing stress tolerance in the process. The practical implications extended beyond scientific interest. As news of the successful trials spread, farmers from across drought-affected regions began contacting us, asking when these heritage varieties might become available. The potential impact on agricultural communities facing similar climate challenges was becoming increasingly apparent. Olivia had embraced her role as research coordinator with remarkable skill, balancing the scientific rigor required by our academic partners with the practical knowledge of a fifth-generation farmer. Her vision for integrating Harrison's genetics into modern sustainable farming practices was gaining attention beyond our local community. The Regional Agricultural Extension Office wants to feature our project in their climate adaptation program, she announced one evening, her excitement evident. They're calling it a model for how historical agricultural knowledge can address contemporary challenges. The transformation extended to our financial situation as well. The NAPT funding had stabilized our immediate crisis, but the longer-term prospects were even more promising. Heritage seed trials were attracting funding from climate adaptation programs, sustainable agriculture initiatives, and even several international development organizations interested in drought-resistant crops for food security in arid regions. 6 weeks after the court hearing, Eleanor Blackwood returned to Willow Creek Farm, accompanied by representatives from the Smithsonian Institution's Agricultural History Division. Their interest in documenting Harrison's collection and its rediscovery added another dimension to the project's significance. The historical narrative here is as valuable as the genetic resources, the Smithsonian curator explained. A 19th century botanist's work, preserved through agricultural catastrophe, rediscovered during a climate crisis, and now potentially helping farmers adapt to changing conditions. It's a powerful example of why preserving agricultural heritage matters. Eleanor took me aside during their visit, her expression serious. You should know that Richard Bennett resigned from the NAPT board yesterday, effective immediately. That's unexpected, I remarked. His term wasn't up for months still. His position became untenable, she explained. Several major donors threatened to withdraw support if he remained involved, citing conflict of interest concerns. The success of your project has garnered significant attention within the agricultural heritage community. Will this affect our partnership? I asked. Only positively, she assured me. Without Bennett's obstructionism, the board has unanimously approved expanding our support for the Harrison Collection Project, including funding for a permanent research facility dedicated to climate-adaptive heritage crops. The news represented another significant victory, but experience had taught me caution. Bennett isn't the type to concede defeat easily. What's his next move likely to be? Eleanor's expression confirmed my suspicion. Our intelligence suggests Bennett Agritech is shifting to a more collaborative approach, at least on the surface. They're establishing a heritage genetics division and reaching out to several of the researchers working with your project, offering substantial funding for cooperative development programs. Trying to gain influence from within rather than control from without, I realized. Precisely, she nodded. They can't prevent these genetics from entering the scientific community now, so they're positioning to influence how they're developed and deployed. It's a more subtle approach, but potentially just as concerning for long-term accessibility. The warning was timely. Within days, several researchers from the university teams mentioned receiving exploratory inquiries from Bennett Agritech about potential collaboration opportunities, accompanied by hints about generous research funding and state-of-the-art facilities. We needed to solidify our own vision for how Harrison's collection would be developed and shared before Bennett's influence could fragment our alliance. After consultation with our core advisors, we developed a formal charter for what we now call the Harrison Heritage Seed Project, a collaborative initiative with explicit principles regarding research sharing, farmer accessibility, and resistance to commercialization that would limit availability. Rather than attempting to prevent researchers from engaging with Bennett Agritech entirely, an unrealistic approach given academic funding pressures, We established clear protocols for how Harrison's genetics could be studied and utilized, regardless of funding source. Any developments derived from the collection would remain in the public domain, accessible to farmers worldwide without restrictive licensing. As autumn approached, the results from our test plots provided the most compelling argument for our approach. The heritage corn varieties had produced respectable yields despite minimal rainfall, not matching optimal condition production of modern varieties, but far exceeding their performance under severe drought stress. Most importantly, these were open-pollinated varieties that farmers could save and replant from year to year, rather than hybrids requiring annual purchase. One evening, as Olivia and I stood surveying the mature corn plants swaying in the evening, "Breeze," she voiced the transformation that had occurred in our understanding of the farm's purpose. "When the drought hit, we were just trying to survive," she reflected. "Now we're part of something that could help farms everywhere adapt to changing conditions." Grandpa always said this land had a purpose beyond just feeding our family. I nodded, remembering my father's stubborn insistence that Willow Creek Farm had significance yet to be discovered. He spent his life searching for that hidden spring, convinced it would save the farm someday. "He wasn't wrong," Olivia smiled. "Just looking for water when the real treasure was seeds." Looking across fields where heritage crops now grew alongside modern varieties in careful experimental plots, I thought about the strange chain of events that had led us here. A drought that threatened everything, a stranger stuck in mud, a buried greenhouse revealed by historical records, and a century-old botanical collection that might help farms adapt to our changing climate. The mud-stuck stranger I'd impulsively helped that morning had indeed changed our future forever, not through the direct financial rescue I'd initially hoped for, but by connecting us to a legacy that transformed crisis into opportunity and a struggling family farm into a center for agricultural renewal. As researchers collected the final measurements before harvest, I spotted Kate Wilson working alongside Professor Morgan. Her enthusiasm for the heritage varieties undiminished despite months of intensive study. Our initial suspicion of her timely appearance had given way to genuine appreciation for her expertise and commitment to keeping these resources accessible. "Sometimes help comes from unexpected places," I observed, "and in unexpected forms." In the distance, another vehicle approached, along our driveway, one of many daily visitors now that Willow Creek Farm had become an active research site. This one was unfamiliar, an expensive sedan with government plates. As it drew closer, I recognized the State Agricultural Commissioner, a man I'd previously only seen in news photographs. "Looks like we have another official visitor," Olivia noted, straightening her cap. "Word keeps spreading." The commissioner emerged from his vehicle with an expression of genuine interest rather than political calculation. "Mr. Parker," he greeted me with a firm handshake, "I've been hearing remarkable things about what's happening here. The governor asked me to assess firsthand whether this model could be expanded to other drought-affected regions in our state." As we began the now familiar tour of our research operations, I reflected on how completely our circumstances had changed. 6 months earlier, we had been facing foreclosure and financial ruin, our fields withering from drought with no solution in sight. Now those same conditions had become the testing ground for agricultural renewal, drawing attention from officials who might otherwise never have noticed our small family farm. The transformation reminded me of something my grandfather often said about farming through difficult times. The same sun that bakes the soil also ripens the crop. It's all in how you work with what you're given. William Harrison's long-forgotten seeds, preserved through a century of darkness, were now growing in that same harsh sunlight, demonstrating resilience that modern agriculture had inadvertently bred away. There was a profound lesson in that paradox. Sometimes the way forward requires rediscovering what was left behind. As the commissioner examined the heritage corn varieties with evident amazement at their condition despite the drought, I noticed Richard Bennett's sleek car passing slowly along the county road bordering our property. He wasn't giving up, just repositioning. The struggle to determine who would control the future of agriculture would continue. But standing amid fields where plants selected by a 19th century botanist were helping address 21st century challenges, I felt a quiet confidence. The true power of Harrison's collection wasn't in its potential commercial value, but in its demonstration that agricultural wisdom accumulated over generations contained solutions we desperately needed in a changing world. That wisdom belonged in the hands of those who worked the land, not locked in corporate vaults. Whatever came next, that principle would guide our path forward. A commitment to keeping agricultural heritage accessible to all who needed it, just as William Harrison had intended when he preserved those seeds in partnership with my ancestors. The drought that had threatened everything we valued had ultimately revealed something more precious than we could have imagined. Not just seeds that could withstand harsh conditions, but a purpose that extended beyond our family's immediate needs to the broader community of those who tend the land in challenging times. All because I stopped to help a stranger stuck in the mud on what seemed like the worst morning of an already difficult year. Sometimes the most important turning points arrive disguised as inconvenient detours, and the people who change our lives forever enter as strangers needing help rather than saviors offering rescue. The commissioner was asking about our plans for the upcoming planting season. As Olivia outlined our expanded research program with characteristic clarity and vision, I felt a surge of gratitude for all that had brought us to this moment. The crisis that revealed opportunity, the history preserved beneath our feet, and the unexpected connections that transformed our understanding of what this land could be. Whatever challenges Richard Bennett or others might present in the future, Willow Creek Farm had found its true purpose, bridging past and future, crisis and renewal, heritage and innovation. The ancient seeds now growing in our fields represented not just crops, but possibilities, connections between generations of agricultural knowledge coming full circle to address the challenges of our time. The crisp October morning brought the first frost to Willow Creek Farm, a silvery blanket that transformed the research fields into a glistening landscape. I stood on the porch with a steaming mug of coffee, watching scientists in insulated jackets moving between experimental plots, carefully documenting how Harrison's heritage varieties responded to the cold snap. 6 months ago, I would have faced this first frost with dread, another sign of an ending season and approaching financial deadlines. Today, it marked merely another phase in our ongoing research project. The heritage corn is handling the temperature drop exceptionally well, Olivia reported, joining me with her own coffee and a tablet displaying overnight sensor readings. Even better than the modern, cold-tolerant hybrids in the control group. Harrison knew what he was doing, I nodded, pride mixing with wonder at how completely our circumstances had transformed. Selecting for resilience in all conditions, not just drought, the fall harvest had exceeded even the most optimistic projections. Harrison's drought-resistant varieties had produced modest but significant yields, despite the continuing dry conditions. And more importantly, they demonstrated remarkable genetic diversity that excited the research teams. Varieties thought extinct for a century were now growing again on the same soil where Harrison had originally cultivated them. Dr. Chen wants to meet this morning to discuss the winter greenhouse trials, Olivia continued, scrolling through her calendar. And the Smithsonian team needs another 4 hours with the original documentation before they return to Washington. Our farmhouse, Once a quiet family space marked by financial worry, had become the bustling center of an international research collaboration. The dining room served as an impromptu conference area. The barn had been converted to a state-of-the-art seed processing facility, and the old equipment shed now housed a climate-controlled repository for preserving the expanding collection. "Morning, Mike," Professor Morgan called as he emerged from one of the temporary research trailers the university had stationed near the excavation site. "You're going to want to see this." He handed me a tablet displaying microscope images of seed cross-sections. "We've identified something remarkable in the cellular structure of Harrison's corn varieties. They possess specialized mechanisms for water retention and utilization that don't exist in modern commercial strains." "Is that why they're outperforming even the drought-resistant hybrids?" I asked, studying the unfamiliar cellular patterns. "Exactly," he confirmed. "Modern breeding selected for yield with supplemental irrigation. These varieties evolved for survival without irrigation. The difference is fundamental. These plants don't just resist drought, they're adapted to thrive in it." The implications were profound for regions increasingly affected by climate change. While modern agricultural science had focused on maximizing production under ideal conditions, Harrison had documented varieties specifically evolved for environmental stress, precisely the conditions becoming more common across agricultural regions worldwide. "Bennett's people know about this," Professor Morgan added, his expression growing serious. "Their research team has been downloading every public paper we publish within minutes of posting. Their new Heritage Division is clearly a direct response." Richard Bennett had indeed pivoted his strategy. After failing to gain control of Harrison's collection through legal challenges, Bennett Agritech had launched an aggressive research program supposedly focused on rediscovering lost agricultural heritage. Industry observers recognized it as a transparent attempt to develop competing products based on the same principles Harrison's seeds were demonstrating. "Let them try," I replied with more confidence than I might have felt months earlier. "They're starting from scratch while we have the original genetics and growing environment. Besides, our open source approach means farmers will have access to these traits without paying premium prices for patented seeds." That open source philosophy had become the cornerstone of our project. Rather than seeking to control and profit from Harrison's discoveries, we had committed to making them widely available, an approach that had attracted support from sustainability organizations, climate adaptation initiatives, and small farmer advocacy groups worldwide. The contrast with Bennett's profit-driven model couldn't have been clearer. Where Bennett Agritech sought to develop proprietary products from heritage genetics, our Harrison Heritage Seed Project emphasized farmer-saved seeds and community-based breeding programs that could adapt to local conditions without corporate dependence. As the morning's activities got underway, I took a moment to walk alone through the excavation site where it had all begun. The stone foundation of Harrison's greenhouse had been carefully uncovered and preserved, now protected by a modern structure that allowed visitors to view the original 19th century architecture. The cellar, where the seed collection had been stored, was maintained as a historical exhibit, though the actual specimens had been transferred to proper conservation facilities. A small brass plaque commemorated the site's significance. William Harrison Botanical Repository, SU 1880, rediscovered 2023, a bridge between agricultural past and future. Nearby, construction had begun on the Permanent Research Center, funded by the National Agricultural Preservation Trust. The facility would integrate cutting-edge laboratories with demonstration fields and educational spaces, creating a world-class center for studying climate-adaptive agriculture while honoring the historical significance of Harrison's work. "Mr. Parker," a voice called from behind me. I turned to find Dr. Catherine Wilson approaching, clipboard in hand and a serious expression on her face. 6 months of collaboration had transformed our relationship from initial suspicion to professional respect and eventually genuine friendship. We've just received the genetic sequencing results from the university lab, she continued, the excitement in her voice barely contained. 3 of Harrison's varieties contain genetic traits completely absent in the USDA's entire seed bank catalog. We're talking about novel drought and heat tolerance mechanisms not documented in any existing commercial or conservation collection. That'll get Bennett's attention, I remarked, understanding immediately the implications for our ongoing struggle. It already has, Kate confirmed grimly. One of my contacts at the USDA says Bennett Agritech filed 11 provisional patent applications yesterday, attempting to claim specific genetic mechanisms related to drought tolerance. They're trying to patent processes that exist in Harrison's seeds. The news was concerning, but not entirely unexpected. Bennett's inability to control the physical collection had shifted his strategy toward intellectual property claims, attempting to patent specific genetic traits or breeding methods that would allow his company to control commercial applications, even while the original seeds remained in our possession. Can they actually patent genetic traits that evolved naturally? I asked, my limited understanding of patent law suddenly inadequate for the new battlefield we were entering. They can try, Kate sighed. They're not claiming the natural traits. Themselves, that would be rejected. They're claiming specific applications or methods of incorporating those traits into commercial varieties. It's legally murky territory, but they have the resources to push the boundaries. We need to talk to Jana, I decided, referring to our legal counsel who had successfully guided us through the earlier ownership challenges. Jana Nielsen arrived. That afternoon, accompanied by a specialist in agricultural patent law she had recruited to help navigate these increasingly complex waters. Their assessment was cautiously optimistic. Bennett's strategy has weaknesses, Jana explained, as our team gathered in the farmhouse dining room. By establishing the open-source Harrison Heritage Seed Project and documenting these traits publicly before his patent applications, we've created prior art that can challenge many of his claims. But we should expect a protracted legal battle, her colleague added. Bennett Agritech will attempt to patent narrow, specific applications, while our position is that these genetic resources should remain in the public domain. Both the legal and scientific complexities are substantial. The meeting continued late, into the evening, developing strategies to protect the open-source nature of Harrison's genetics while continuing the research that made them valuable. The approach we settled on was dual-tracked, accelerating public documentation and sharing of Harrison's varieties to strengthen prior art claims, while simultaneously pursuing our own defensive patents that would be freely licensed to prevent corporate enclosure. It's ironic, Olivia observed as the meeting concluded. We're having to use the patent system to prevent patenting. Welcome to modern agriculture, Professor Morgan replied with a wry smile. The commons have to be actively defended now, not just assumed. The following week brought an unexpected development. A sleek corporate helicopter landed in our east field, and Richard Bennett himself emerged, accompanied by a single assistant rather than his usual entourage. The calculated informality of his arrival, unannounced and without lawyers, suggested a change in approach. Sheriff Jenkins, who happened to be visiting to discuss security for an upcoming public demonstration day, watched Bennett's approach with suspicion. "Want me to stay for this conversation, Mike?" he offered. "Thanks, Thomas. But I think we can handle it," I replied, curious about what would bring Bennett personally to our farm after months of working through proxies and legal channels. Bennett's greeting was surprisingly cordial as he approached the porch where Olivia and I waited. Mr. Parker, Ms. Parker? He nodded respectfully. Thank you for not immediately having the sheriff escort me off your property. I appreciate the courtesy. What brings you to Willow Creek Farm, Mr. Bennett? I asked directly, maintaining professional politeness despite our adversarial history. A proposal, he replied simply. One I thought deserved a personal conversation rather than communication through attorneys. I gestured toward the porch chairs. We're listening. As Bennett settled into a seat, I noticed subtle changes in his demeanor, a certain weariness around the eyes, a less commanding posture. The past months had clearly taken a toll, though whether from our specific conflict or broader business, pressures remained unclear. I'll be direct, he began. The approach Bennett Agritech has taken regarding Harrison's collection has been counterproductive. Our initial assessment valued these genetics primarily as proprietary assets we could exclusively control. That assessment was flawed. The admission was unexpected, though I maintained a neutral expression, waiting for him to continue. The reality is that climate adaptation in agriculture requires collaborative approaches, Bennett continued. The challenges are too complex and urgent for purely proprietary solutions. The public support your project has garnered demonstrates that reality clearly. That's quite a change in perspective, Olivia noted skeptically, especially given your recent patent filings. Bennett nodded, accepting the challenge. Those applications have been withdrawn as of this morning. They represented an outdated approach that I've come to recognize as both legally tenuous and strategically misguided. If Bennett was attempting to disarm us with frankness, he was succeeding, at least partially. This apparent reversal demanded explanation. Why the change of heart? I asked directly. Bennett considered the question carefully before responding. 3 factors. First, pragmatic recognition that the legal battles would be protracted and uncertain. Second, market realities. Farmers are increasingly resistant to exclusively proprietary technologies, especially for climate adaptation. And third, he paused, seeming to weigh his words, personal reconsideration of my company's longer-term role in agricultural sustainability. The last reason sounded suspiciously like corporate public relations speak, but his withdrawal of the patent applications represented concrete action beyond mere words. What exactly are you proposing? I pressed. A collaborative research partnership, Bennett replied. Bennett Agritech would provide significant funding and our extensive development capabilities to the Harrison Heritage Seed Project without claiming exclusive ownership or restrictive patents on the results. And in return, Olivia asked, correctly assuming this wasn't philanthropy. Non-exclusive licensing of specific commercial applications, Bennett explained. We would develop commercial seed varieties incorporating Harrison's genetics, but the underlying traits would remain open source, and farmers would retain the right to save and replant seeds, a departure from our current business model. The proposal was startling in how dramatically it departed from Bennett's previous positioning. Either he had experienced a genuine philosophical shift, or market pressures had forced a strategic retreat disguised as enlightened collaboration. Why would Bennett Agritech abandon its core business model of proprietary genetics? I challenged. Bennett's expression turned grimmer. Because that model has a limited future in a climate-changed world. The data is unambiguous. Proprietary approaches alone cannot address the speed and scale of adaptation required. Companies that don't evolve will become irrelevant, regardless of their current market position. There was something in his tone, a resignation mixed with determination, that suggested more personal motivation than corporate strategy. I decided to probe further. What's really driving this, Bennett? 6 months of legal maneuvers and suddenly you're advocating open source agriculture? It doesn't add up. He was silent for a moment, looking out over the research fields where Harrison's varieties grew alongside modern hybrids in carefully designed comparison plots. When he spoke again, his corporate polish had diminished. "My daughter is completing her doctorate in climate adaptation at Stanford," he said finally. "Her dissertation focuses on agricultural resilience in drought-affected regions. She's been vocal about the limitations of proprietary approaches, including her criticism of Bennett Agritech specifically. The personal dimension was unexpected, humanizing the corporate adversary we'd been fighting for months. I've spent 20 years building a company focused on controlling genetic resources," Bennett continued. "She spent the last 5 years demonstrating why that model cannot address the challenges ahead. Recent events have forced me to consider that she may be right." "And the board of directors?" Olivia asked practically. "They're comfortable with this strategic reversal?" "Not entirely," Bennett admitted. "This visit isn't officially sanctioned, but quarterly results have been concerning as farmer adoption of our premium drought-resistant varieties has plateaued. The market is speaking and adaptive approaches are gaining traction. I'm arguing that we need to evolve before we're overtaken." The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, delving into specific details of his proposed partnership. The framework he outlined would maintain the open-source foundation of Harrison's genetics while allowing commercial development of specific applications. A hybrid approach that acknowledged both market realities and sustainability principles. "We'll need to discuss this with our partners," I said finally. "The Harrison Heritage Seed Project involves multiple institutions and stakeholders now. This isn't a decision Olivia and I can make unilaterally." Bennett nodded, understanding the transformed nature of what had begun as a simple farm discovery. "Of course. I'm not expecting an immediate decision. This is merely opening a conversation that I believe could benefit all parties. Most importantly, the farmers who will need these resilient varieties as conditions continue to change." As he prepared to depart, Bennett paused at the steps of the porch. "For what it's worth, Parker, you've created something remarkable here. What began as a fortunate discovery has become a model for how agricultural heritage can address contemporary challenges. Whatever comes of this proposal, that achievement deserves recognition." The unexpected compliment felt genuine, though years of farming had taught me to maintain healthy skepticism about sudden changes in weather or human nature. After Bennett's helicopter disappeared beyond the horizon, our core team assembled to assess this unexpected development. Professor Morgan, Kate Wilson, Jana Nielsen, and Eleanor Blackwood from the NAPT joined us in evaluating the proposal and its potential implications. "It could be a trap," Jana cautioned, "a way to gain insider access to research they couldn't acquire through legal challenges." "Or it could be exactly what he described," Professor Morgan countered, "a recognition that the proprietary model has limitations in addressing climate adaptation. The research community has been arguing this for years." "Bennett Agritech's resources and development capabilities are substantial," Eleanor acknowledged. "Their distribution networks reach farmers worldwide. If they're genuinely committed to a more open approach, the potential impact of Harrison's genetics could be significantly amplified." "That's the essential question," Kate observed. "Is their commitment genuine and durable, or merely tactical until they regain advantage?" The discussion continued late into the evening, examining potential safeguards, governance structures, and verification mechanisms that might protect the open-source nature of Harrison's legacy while allowing for broader development and distribution. "We need to test Bennett's sincerity," Olivia suggested finally. "Propose a collaboration structure with explicit open-source guarantees and clear penalties for violation. If he's genuine, he'll accept meaningful accountability." The approach made sense. Rather than rejecting or embracing Bennett's overture immediately, we would develop a counter-proposal that embodied our core principles while testing his commitment to this new direction. Over the following weeks, as the first snows dusted the research fields, we worked with our legal and scientific advisors to craft a detailed framework for potential collaboration. The document explicitly protected farmer rights to save and replant seeds, required transparent research sharing, and established an independent governance board that would include farmer representatives and public interest advocates. Bennett's response to our counter-proposal would come in early December at a regional agricultural conference where both he and I had been invited to speak about climate adaptation in farming. The organizers, unaware of our complicated history, had scheduled our presentations consecutively, an ironic juxtaposition given our months of conflict. The conference center in Lincoln was packed with farmers, researchers, policymakers, and industry representatives, all increasingly concerned with agricultural resilience in changing conditions. My presentation focused on the practical implications of Harrison's rediscovered varieties, showing time-lapse footage of how they maintained productivity during drought conditions that caused modern varieties to wither. These aren't museum pieces or historical curiosities, I emphasized to the attentive audience. They're living examples of how agricultural knowledge accumulated over generations contains solutions we desperately need today. Our commitment is ensuring these resources remain accessible to all farmers facing similar challenges, not locked behind proprietary barriers. As I concluded to substantial applause, I noticed Bennett in the front row, listening intently rather than reviewing his own upcoming remarks. His presentation would either publicly embrace the collaborative approach he had privately proposed or signal a return to proprietary positioning. When Bennett took the stage, he began not with corporate slides or industry projections, but with a black and white photograph of a drought-stricken farm from the 1930s Dust Bowl. "My grandfather lost everything in 1936, he began, surprising the audience with the personal opening. 3 generations of farming ended because the techniques and varieties they relied on couldn't adapt to changing conditions. That family history shaped my approach to agricultural resilience, though perhaps not in the way you might expect. He advanced to a modern image of laboratory technicians examining seed samples. I built Bennett Agritech on the premise that proprietary technology was the answer to agricultural vulnerability, that corporate research and controlled distribution would develop and deliver solutions more effectively than traditional agricultural knowledge. The audience, largely composed of farmers and agricultural researchers, shifted uncomfortably at this explicit acknowledgement of a corporate philosophy many found problematic. "Recent events have caused me to re-evaluate that premise," Bennett continued, his voice taking on a reflective quality rarely displayed in his public appearances. The rediscovery of William Harrison's botanical collection, seeds preserved from the 19th century that outperform modern varieties under stress conditions, challenges fundamental assumptions about agricultural progress and who controls it. He glanced in my direction briefly before continuing. "When Harrison's collection was first discovered on the Parker farm, Bennett Agritech saw it primarily as a proprietary opportunity, valuable genetics to be acquired, controlled, and commercialized. That perspective led to legal challenges, patent applications, and corporate maneuvering that ultimately proved both unsuccessful and, I now believe, misguided." The frank admission generated murmurs throughout the hall. Corporate executives rarely acknowledge strategic failures so explicitly, particularly in public forums. "The climate crisis demands a different approach," Bennett stated firmly. "Proprietary barriers to climate-adaptive genetics increasingly appear not just ethically questionable, but practically counterproductive. The scale and urgency of agricultural adaptation requires collaborative approaches that leverage both corporate capabilities and community knowledge. He advanced to his final slide, which displayed a framework nearly identical to the counter-proposal we had developed, a structured collaboration that maintained open-source foundations while allowing commercial applications under specific conditions. Bennett Agritech is therefore announcing a fundamental shift in our approach to climate-adaptive genetics, he declared, beginning with our participation in the Harrison Heritage Seed Project under the governance framework developed by the Parker Farm and their research partners. This framework explicitly protects farmer seed-saving rights, ensures research transparency, and places critical adaptive traits in the public domain, while allowing commercial development of specific applications. The announcement generated immediate reaction, surprise from industry representatives, cautious approval from research organizations, and speculative murmuring among the farmers present. Bennett had not only accepted our counter-proposal, but had done so publicly, committing his company's reputation to this new direction. As the session concluded and attendees moved toward the refreshment area, Bennett approached me directly, extending his hand. Your counter-proposal was excellent, Parker. Exactly the accountability mechanisms needed to make this collaboration credible. I accepted the handshake cautiously. A public commitment helps, but implementation will prove your sincerity. Agreed, he nodded, which is why the first step is transferring our drought resilience research team to the joint project, along with $5 million in initial funding. The legal documents are already with your attorney for review. The scale of the commitment was significant, suggesting this wasn't merely a public relations gesture. Still, decades of farming had taught me that even the most promising conditions could change unexpectedly. What happened with your daughter? I asked, curious about the personal dimension he had mentioned during his farm visit. Did she influence this decision? Something like genuine emotion flickered across Bennett's face. She refused a position in our research division after completing her doctorate, said she couldn't work for a company that restricted access to resilience traits farmers needed for survival. He paused. When your own child rejects your life's work on ethical grounds, it forces reconsideration. The moment of vulnerability humanized our corporate adversary in ways I hadn't anticipated. Before I could respond, we were interrupted by a group of farmers eager to discuss the practical implications of this new collaboration. The conversation quickly expanded to include researchers, extension agents, and agricultural policy specialists, all energized by the potential of this unexpected partnership. As I participated in these discussions, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary chain of events that had led to this moment. A chance encounter with a mud-stuck stranger had revealed a hidden botanical treasure, triggering conflicts and collaborations that ultimately challenged fundamental assumptions about agricultural knowledge and who controlled it. The struggling family farm fighting foreclosure had transformed into the center of an international research collaboration, now joined by a corporate giant reinventing its approach to climate adaptation. Harrison's forgotten seeds, preserved through a century of darkness, were growing again in experimental fields across multiple states, their resilience traits studied by researchers from organizations that had been adversaries months earlier. Later that evening, as the conference reception wound down, Olivia found me by the windows overlooking the city lights. Bennett's research director approached me, she reported. They want to start cooperative trials on 15 adaptive varieties next growing season. Their tissue culture capabilities could accelerate propagation significantly. Do you trust them? I asked, valuing her judgment that had proven accurate throughout our journey. She considered carefully before answering. I trust that market realities and public pressure will keep them accountable. Farmers are watching this collaboration closely. If Bennett reverts to restrictive practices, the backlash would be substantial. She smiled slightly. Besides, we've built enough safeguards into the framework to ensure the core genetics remain open source, regardless of commercial applications. As we prepared to return to Willow Creek Farm the following morning, I received an unexpected message from Eleanor Blackwood. The National Agricultural Preservation Trust Board had unanimously approved expanded funding for our research center, with construction now scheduled for completion by early summer. More surprisingly, they had decided to name the facility the Parker Harrison Center for Agricultural Resilience, placing our family name alongside the botanist whose work we had uncovered. The recognition was humbling and somewhat uncomfortable. We had been fortunate discoverers, not visionary creators. The true value lay in Harrison's meticulous work and in the collaborative efforts of the researchers, legal experts, and preservation specialists who had helped build something meaningful from that discovery. Yet there was a certain appropriateness to acknowledging the connection between past and present, between the 19th century botanist who had preserved agricultural biodiversity and the 21st century farm family who had returned it to active cultivation. Both represented approaches to agriculture that valued resilience, adaptation, and knowledge sharing over short-term productivity or proprietary control. As our truck rolled back toward Willow Creek Farm through the snow-dusted Nebraska landscape, I found myself contemplating how completely our circumstances had transformed. The desperate farmer checking failing irrigation systems on a drought-stressed morning could never have imagined that stopping to help a stranded traveler would ultimately lead to partnerships with research institutions, preservation trusts, and even the corporate giant that had once threatened everything we valued. The mud-stuck stranger had indeed changed our future forever, not through direct intervention, but by connecting us to a hidden legacy that transformed crisis into opportunity. Dr. Catherine Wilson's seemingly chance appearance on our access road had initiated a sequence of discoveries and decisions that redefined not just our farm's prospects, but our understanding of its purpose. Willow Creek Farm would continue producing crops as it had for 5 generations, but it now served a broader mission, bridging agricultural past and future, demonstrating how forgotten knowledge could address emerging challenges, and modeling collaborative approaches to climate adaptation. The financial crisis that had threatened our family legacy had ultimately revealed its deeper significance. As we turned onto the familiar gravel drive leading to our farmhouse, now flanked by research facilities and experimental fields, I noticed the first green shoots emerging from a winter wheat test plot planted with Harrison's cold, hardy varieties. Even in December's chill, these resilient plants were growing, adapting, persisting, much like the farm itself had done through generations of challenges and changes. The drought continued and climate uncertainties remained, but the seeds of resilience had been planted, both literally in our research fields and figuratively in the collaborative approaches emerging from our unexpected discovery. Whatever the future held, Willow Creek Farm would face it with new purpose, new partnerships, and renewed connection to the agricultural wisdom of previous generations who had also faced changing conditions with creativity and determination. The stranger stuck in mud had changed everything, though not in any way I could have anticipated on that desperate morning. Sometimes help comes disguised as inconvenience, opportunity appears as crisis, and futures change direction in the muddy moments when we least expect transformation. 1 year later, the morning sun gleamed off the glass walls of the newly constructed Parker Harrison Agricultural Center, where once only weathered barns had stood. The transformation of Willow Creek Farm from a drought-stricken property on the brink of foreclosure to an internationally recognized research facility, seemed almost miraculous. Though I knew every hard-won step of the journey, Dr. Catherine Wilson, once just a mud-stuck stranger I'd impulsively helped, now headed our genetics preservation program, working alongside Olivia to develop drought-resistant crop varieties that were helping farmers across 3 continents. Richard Bennett, after his surprising change of heart, had become our most significant corporate partner, his resources accelerating the distribution of Harrison's heritage seeds to regions already suffering from climate change. Standing at the edge of the experimental fields, where Harrison's century-old varieties grew alongside their modern descendants, I watched a group of visiting farmers examine the crops with keen interest. These weren't researchers or academics, but practical men and women who worked the soil daily, their livelihoods dependent on crops that could withstand increasingly unpredictable conditions. Their growing excitement as they compared our heritage, varieties to conventional plantings, told me more than any scientific paper could. These forgotten plants were offering genuine hope. If you'd told me a year ago that stopping to pull someone's fancy SUV out of the mud would lead to all this, I remarked to Olivia as she joined me, I'd have said you were suffering from heat stroke. She smiled, resting her hand on my shoulder. The smallest choices sometimes have the biggest consequences, Dad. One act of kindness opened a door that changed everything. That evening, as a gentle rain, the first in months, began to fall on our thriving fields, I realized that the true treasure hadn't been the seeds themselves, but the connections they had created between past agricultural wisdom and future challenges, between scientific knowledge and farming practice, between individual struggle and collective resilience. The drought that had threatened to destroy our family legacy had ultimately revealed its deeper purpose. As the raindrops intensified, promising life to parched soil, I thought about how completely our understanding of value had transformed. This land wasn't merely acreage to be measured in yields and market prices, but a living repository of agricultural heritage that connected generations across time. The stranger stuck in mud had indeed changed our future forever, though not in any way I could have predicted on that desperate morning a year ago. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.